The first time my husband spoke to me, the words weren't, "I love you." They were, "You need to listen very carefully." The sound of his voice didn't echo. It didn't boom or crack the walls of that grand house the way I imagined a secret revelation might. It was low, steady, almost gentle, and somehow that made it more terrifying. We had just stepped inside the mansion, our mansion, I suppose, after the wedding guests finally left. The doors closed behind us with a soft, padded thud, sealing in the quiet that had followed him for years. I remember the smell of fresh lilies from the arrangements lining the hallway, already beginning to wilt under the weight of too much money and too little love. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step louder than the last, like my body was betraying my attempt to stay calm. I had married a man the world believed was mute, not quiet, not reserved, mute. That word had followed his name in every whisper, every contract, every sideways glance from my relatives when the proposal was announced. The silent millionaire, the poor man who can't speak, the lucky girl who'll never hear a harsh word from her husband. I believed it too. I had built my expectations around that silence, shaped my courage to live inside it. And now, standing in a hallway bigger than the apartment I grew up in, holding my breath beneath layers of white lace, I realized how fragile those assumptions were. He stopped walking. I took one more step before noticing, then froze. My bouquet, some extravagant thing chosen by a planner who didn't know me, slipped slightly in my hands. When I turned, he was looking at me, not with the polite distance he'd mastered in public, but with something sharper, urgent. "Before we go any further," he said, "there are things you need to know." I remember blinking, once, twice. My mind scrambled for logic, for an explanation that wouldn't unravel everything I thought I understood. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe stress had cracked something in me. But then he spoke again, and the silence I had married shattered. Before that night, my life had been simple in ways that didn't look simple from the outside. I was raised to believe stability was love's cousin, that safety mattered more than passion, that sometimes you chose the life that would hold you instead of the one that set your heart racing. My mother used to say, "Peace is louder than romance if you know how to listen." She said it after my father left, after the shouting ended and the house settled into something quieter, something survivable. So when the proposal came, unexpected, formal, wrapped in lawyers and non-disclosure agreements, I didn't dismiss it the way my friends expected me to. His name carried weight, not the flashy kind, not tabloid wealth, old money, infrastructure money, the kind of wealth that hums beneath cities and never asks for attention. I had seen him twice before the proposal, once at a charity dinner where he nodded politely while others spoke over him, once at a foundation meeting where he communicated through a tablet, his fingers precise, his eyes tired. He was respectful, distant, unreachable in a way that felt almost merciful. The arrangement was explained to me gently, as if softness could disguise the truth. His family wanted him married, a stable presence, someone without ambition for the spotlight, someone who would not embarrass them or dig too deeply into matters better left alone. And me? I was sensible, educated, quiet in my own way. I worked in community outreach, earned enough to live modestly, and had no powerful family name to complicate things. I was safe. We met properly 3 times before the engagement was finalized, always with others present, always with his assistant translating his typed words. Our conversations were careful, courteous, empty of risk. He asked about my work, I asked about his foundations. He listened, really listened, his eyes narrowing slightly when I spoke, as if memorizing the rhythm of my voice. Sometimes I wondered what it would be like to hear his laugh. Then I scolded myself for being foolish. The wedding was exactly what you'd expect when money makes decisions faster than hearts. A cathedral filled with people who didn't know me and didn't need to. My mother cried quietly beside me, torn between pride and fear. His family smiled in polished, practiced ways, their eyes always scanning, measuring. He stood at the altar, tall and composed, his silence almost reverent in that sacred space. When the officiant spoke his vows, he nodded at the right moments, his hand firm around mine. I felt strangely protected, as though nothing loud or cruel could ever come from him. That was the lie I didn't know I was accepting. At the reception, people spoke about him more than to him. I watched as they leaned close, lowered their voices, shared opinions they'd never dare voice if he could answer back. I smiled until my cheeks hurt. I drank champagne that tasted like obligation. And all the while, he watched, silent, observing. When it was finally time to leave, the relief hit me so hard I nearly cried. The car ride was quiet, just the soft hum of the engine and the city lights blurring past the window. I adjusted my dress, suddenly aware of how little I knew about the man beside me. I thought the silence would continue. I thought I was prepared for it. I wasn't prepared for the truth. Inside the mansion, with no audience left to perform for, he loosened his tie slowly, deliberately. The sound of fabric sliding free felt indecently loud. I set my bouquet down, my hands trembling despite my effort to still them. That's when he spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. "I didn't choose silence because I couldn't speak," he said. "I chose it because speaking nearly destroyed me." The room seemed to tilt. I reached for the back of a chair, grounding myself in something solid. He took a step closer, his expression unreadable, but his voice steady, practiced, like a man who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head. "My family will never tell you the truth, and if you don't hear it from me now, you won't be safe later." Safe. That word settled into my chest like a warning bell. I opened my mouth to ask a question, any question, but no sound came out. For the first time in our short marriage, it was me who had no voice, and him who had too much to say. I didn't sit down right away. I stood there in that cavernous living room, the chandelier above us glowing like it was unaware of the shift that had just taken place beneath it. My wedding dress felt heavier by the second, the fabric pulling at my shoulders as if it too wanted answers. "You can speak," I finally said. My voice sounded small, like it didn't belong in a room this size. "Yes," he replied simply. No apology yet, no explanation, just the truth, laid bare and unadorned. I searched his face for signs of deception, nervous tics, darting eyes, anything that would tell me this was a cruel joke or a misunderstanding, but there was none of that, only a kind of tired resolve, like a man who had carried a weight for too long and finally set it down. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "Because telling you earlier would have put you in danger, and because if you had known, you might not have agreed to marry me." That stung more than I expected, not because he was wrong, but because he knew me well enough already to say it out loud. I sank into the nearest chair, the silk of my dress whispering against the upholstery, my hands folded in my lap the way my mother taught me when I was trying not to cry. "Start from the beginning," I said, "please." He nodded and moved toward the bar tucked discreetly into the corner. He poured himself a glass of water, then paused, glancing at me as if asking permission. I nodded. He handed me a glass too, his fingers brushing mine for the first time without ceremony. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it grounded me. "My silence began 12 years ago," he said, sitting across from me, after a boardroom meeting that turned into an interrogation. He told the story slowly, carefully, choosing his words like they might explode if handled carelessly. His family, powerful and ruthless in ways they never showed the public, had learned that he intended to break from tradition. He wanted to redirect funds, pull investments out of industries that quietly harmed communities while publicly funding charities to mask it. He wanted transparency, accountability. They called it betrayal. I called it conscience. What followed wasn't physical violence, not exactly. It was something colder. Lawyers, psychologists paid to declare him unstable, a manufactured scandal that nearly landed him in prison for crimes he didn't commit. His voice lowered when he spoke about the threats, subtle ones, whispered through intermediaries. Accidents happen, careers end, voices can be taken away in more ways than one. "So you stopped speaking," I said, my throat tight. "I stopped giving them ammunition," he replied. "Every word I said was twisted, every conversation recorded or misquoted. Silence became my shield." The room felt suddenly too small. "But doctors, therapists, the public?" "He let them believe what they wanted," he replied. "A mute man is pitied, dismissed, controlled, but he also becomes invisible." Invisible. I thought of all the times people spoke over him, around him, assuming he was harmless. I thought of how easily I had done the same. "And me?" I asked. "Why choose me?" That was the first time his composure cracked. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, rubbing his hands together like he was cold. "Because you don't crave power, because you have roots outside my world, and because you know what it's like to survive quiet." I didn't answer right away. He wasn't wrong. After my father left, after the shouting stopped, my mother and I learned how to live in the absence of noise. We learned how to read rooms, moods, silences. Survival had sharpened my instincts in ways I rarely acknowledged. "They won't hurt you," he continued quickly, as if sensing my hesitation. "Not directly. That's why the marriage was important to them. It makes you visible, protected, but also useful." There it was, the part he hadn't wanted to say. "How?" I asked. "He believe you'll keep me compliant," he said, a reminder of what I could lose. I laughed then, a short, brittle sound that surprised both of us. "They don't know me very well." A corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but something close. "That's what I'm counting on." The days that followed felt like a rehearsal for a life I hadn't agreed to audition for. We moved through the mansion together like strangers learning a shared language. Staff appeared and disappeared with uncanny timing. Every room had a camera, though none were obvious. I felt watched in the way you feel a draft, subtle, constant, impossible to ignore. In public, he returned to silence. The tablet came back out, his head bowed politely while others filled the air with their voices. If anyone noticed my change in me, the way my gaze sharpened, the way my smile fenned, they didn't comment. At night, when the doors were closed and the house finally slept, he spoke. Sometimes it was practical, schedules, names, warnings about which relatives to trust and which relatives smiled too easily. Other times it was quieter, stories from his childhood, the loneliness of being raised as an asset instead of a person, the relief he felt the first time he chose silence and realized how much power there was in withholding. I listened, really listened, and slowly, without meaning to, I began to care. That frightened me more than his family ever could, because caring made me reckless. It started with something small, a question asked at breakfast by his aunt, sharp-eyed, perfectly coiffed, her voice dipped in artificial concern. "How is our dear boy adjusting to married life?" she asked, her gaze sliding toward me. "He's adjusting just fine, aren't you?" I said calmly. For a split second, panic flashed across his face. Then he nodded, typing something polite onto his tablet. But her aunt watched me more closely after that. The first real clue came a week later. I was in the library, a vast wood-paneled room that smelled of leather and dust, when I found a folder tucked behind a row of old financial ledgers. It wasn't hidden well enough to be accidental, but not so obvious that it screamed trap. Inside were documents, medical reports, psychological evaluations. His name was on all of them. They painted a picture of a man unfit to lead, prone to delusions, unstable under pressure. One report suggested prolonged muteness as a symptom of severe trauma-induced dissociation. Another hinted at institutionalization if symptoms worsen. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. Dates, signatures, familiar family names. When I confronted him that night, he didn't look surprised. "They're contingency plans," he said quietly, "in case I stop cooperating." "And now?" I asked. "And now," he replied, meeting my eyes, "you're part of that equation." That was the moment I understood what marriage meant in his world. Not partnership, leverage. I began to notice things after that, conversations that stopped when I entered a room, invitations extended and rescinded without explanation, a cousin who asked too many questions about my work, my finances, my past relationships. One afternoon, I found my phone had been searched, nothing taken, just touched. I didn't tell him right away. I wanted to be sure, wanted to understand the shape of the threat before naming it. But the silence between us shifted, no longer protective, now it was tense, coiled. The wedding photos arrived in a thick, expensive album. I flipped through them slowly, studying the faces behind the smiles. His family's eyes were sharp, assessing, measuring outcomes. In every photo, he was silent. In every photo, I was unaware. That night, lying beside him in a bed too large for comfort, I whispered, "What happens if they decide I'm a liability?" He didn't answer right away. His breathing was steady, but his body had gone rigid. "They won't hurt you," he said again, "but they might try to break us." "How?" "By making you doubt me," he said, "by making you feel trapped, by reminding you that everything you have now exists because they allow it." I stared at the ceiling, tracing the faint outlines of the molding with my eyes. "And if they don't work?" I asked. "Then they'll remind me what I stand to lose." I turned to him then, really looked at him in the dim light. For the first time, I saw not the powerful figure the world feared, nor the silent man they pitied, but someone deeply, painfully human. "I didn't agree to be a pawn," I said. He reached for my hand, hesitating for just a moment before lacing his fingers through mine. Neither did I. That was the night we made a quiet agreement. No witnesses, no contracts, just a promise spoken softly into the dark. We would watch, we would wait, and we would not underestimate the cost of breaking silence. But neither of us realized how quickly the game would escalate. Not until the day his mother asked to see me alone. His mother requested the meeting the way powerful people always do, politely, precisely, and without offering room for refusal. The message came through one of the household staff, a woman who'd worked in that mansion long enough to perfect the art of neutrality. "Mrs. Caldwell would like to have tea with you this afternoon," she said, her tone pleasant, her eyes carefully blank. Not if I was available, not when might suit me, just would like, as though my compliance were already assumed. I nodded, thanked her, and watched her leave. Only then did I allow myself to exhale. His mother, Evelyn Caldwell, was a woman whose presence lingered even when she wasn't in the room. She rarely raised her voice, she never repeated herself, and she had built an empire around the quiet expectation that people would fall in line. I told my husband about the invitation that evening. We were in the small sitting room off the master bedroom, the one place in the house that felt almost human. He was standing by the window, watching the grounds below like he was measuring escape routes. "She wants to assess you," he said after a moment. "Assess me for what?" He turned, his expression grave. "For usefulness and for obedience." I swallowed. And if I fail? He didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. The next afternoon, I dressed carefully. Nothing extravagant, nothing defiant. A soft blue dress, modest and unremarkable. The kind of outfit that said I belong, but I'm not a threat. At least, that was the intention. We met in the sunroom where glass walls let in too much light and too many eyes. Tea was already set when I arrived. Fine china, delicate pastries I had no appetite for. His mother sat at the table, hands folded neatly, her silver hair swept back from a face that betrayed no age. "My dear," she said, rising just enough to be polite, "thank you for coming." "Of course," I replied, taking the seat across from her. She poured the tea herself, an unnecessary gesture meant to suggest warmth. "I hope marriage life is treating you well," I said carefully. "It's been enlightening." Her lips curved into a small smile. "Marriage often is." For a few minutes, she asked harmless questions about my upbringing, my work, my mother's health. She listened attentively, nodding at the right moments, her eyes never leaving mine. I answered honestly, but selectively. Every word felt like a test. Then she set her cup down. "You must find my son's condition challenging," she said, her tone gentle. I met her gaze. "I don't think of it as a condition." Her eyebrow lifted almost imperceptibly. "No?" "No," I said. "I think of it as a choice." The air shifted. She studied me for a long moment, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. "You're perceptive. That can be a blessing or a burden." I waited. "My son has always been difficult, strong-willed, idealistic. He forgets that ideals are luxuries not everyone can afford." "With respect," I said, my pulse steady despite the tension, "I think ideals are often the only thing that keeps people human." Her smile hardened. How poetic. She leaned back slightly, folding her hands. "You understand, of course, that this marriage exists within a larger framework, responsibilities, expectations." "I understand there are expectations, but I also understand my role is as his wife, not his warden." That did it. Her eyes cooled, the warmth evaporating like mist. "You are young and new to this world. Let me offer you some advice." I nodded, though every instinct told me to stand. "Silence," she said softly, "has served my son very well. It would be unfortunate if something or someone encouraged him to abandon it." The threat was subtle, almost elegant. "I would never encourage him to do anything that harms him." She tilted her head. "Good, because harm can be misunderstood." When the meeting ended, she kissed my cheek lightly, her perfume sharp and cloying. "Welcome to the family." I walked out with my spine straight and my hands clenched at my sides. That evening, I told him everything. We sat at the kitchen table, one of the few spaces not designed for show, our plates untouched. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with each detail. "She's testing boundaries," he said when I finished, "and you didn't give her what she wanted." "What did she want?" "To see if you'd be afraid or grateful." "I'm neither. I'm angry." A flicker of something like pride crossed his face. "That makes you dangerous. Then we're evenly matched." He reached across the table, covering my hand. "They'll escalate," he warned. "Small pressures, inconveniences, attempts to isolate you." "As long as we're honest with each other, they won't succeed," I said, squeezing his fingers. I believed that then. I hadn't yet learned how powerful gout could be when planted carefully. The first crack appeared quietly. My mother called one morning, her voice strained. "Did you know your husband's company is being investigated?" My heart skipped. "Investigated for what?" "I'm not sure. It was mentioned at church. Someone's nephew works in finance. They said it's serious." I confronted my husband that night. He looked genuinely surprised. "It's a rumor. They do this sometimes, leak half-truths to see what sticks." But my mother heard it from someone outside your circle. That's the point. They want it to reach you. I wanted to believe him. I did, but the seed had been planted. Then came the canceled charity event I'd been planning for months, funding withdrawn without explanation, a polite email from the board citing restructuring priorities. My work had never been touched by his family before. They're crossing a line, I said, pacing the bedroom. They're coming after me now. They're testing how much you can take and how much I'm willing to risk. That night, he found me standing in the dark, staring at his tablet, his shoulders slumped. "What are you reading?" I asked. He hesitated, then turned the screen toward me. An email from his mother. "Your wife is becoming a liability. This can be managed if you cooperate." My stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said slowly, "they want me to go back to being silent completely. And if I don't?" His eyes met mine, filled with something raw and unguarded. "Then they'll make your life very difficult." I felt the walls closing in. "We can leave," I said suddenly. "Walk away, start over." He shook his head. "They won't let us, not without consequences." "Then what do we do?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at me like someone looks at a horizon they know they can't reach. "There's something I haven't told you," he said finally. My chest tightened. "What?" He took a deep breath. "The silence wasn't the only thing they took from me." The words hung between us, heavy and foreboding. I sat down slowly, bracing myself. "Tell me." He swallowed. "They took my evidence." "What evidence?" "Proof of what they've been hiding, of the harm they've caused. I thought it was destroyed, but recently I found out it might still exist." A cold realization crept over me. "And they think I might help you find it." "Yes, whether I want to or not." I closed my eyes, the weight of it all pressing down on me at once. The marriage, the manipulation, the silent war unfolding around us. "This isn't just about control, it's about survival." He nodded. "Always has been." That night, sleep refused to come. The ticking of the clock sounded too loud, too final. I stared into the darkness, my mind racing with possibilities and consequences. I had married into a family that understood power better than love, and I was no longer sure whether silence would save us or destroy us. The next morning, I woke with the unmistakable feeling that something had shifted while I slept. Not in the house, nothing as obvious as a door left open or a light left on, but inside me. A quiet certainty had taken root, the kind that comes when fear finally exhausts itself and leaves clarity behind. If they were going to use me as leverage, then I needed to understand exactly how much weight I carried. I didn't tell my husband what I was planning, not yet. Not because I didn't trust him, but because trust, I was learning, didn't always mean transparency. Sometimes it meant protection. I started with the staff. It wasn't difficult. Power like that family's bred loyalty, but it also bred resentment. All I had to do was listen, ask gentle questions, remember names, treat people like people instead of fixtures. The housekeeper, Maria, was the first to slip. She'd been with the family for over 20 years. She knew the rhythms of the house, the moods of its occupants, the places where secrets collected dust. One afternoon, as we folded linens together in the laundry room, I asked her how long she'd worked there. "Long enough to know when storms are coming," she said quietly. "What kind of storms?" I asked. She glanced toward the door, then back at me. "The kind that don't make noise." That was all she said, but it was enough. Over the next week, patterns emerged. A secure storage room in the East Wing no one entered without permission, files moved late at night, a safe in his mother's study that was never left unattended, and always, always eyes on me. I played my part carefully, attended dinners, smiled at the right moments, spoke only when spoken to. I let them believe their pressure was working. At night, when my husband spoke, his voice was lower now, guarded. He told me about the evidence, financial records, internal communications, proof of how the family had funneled money through shell organizations while publicly condemning the very practices they profited from. It was enough to ruin them, and enough to ruin me if they framed it right. "Where did you keep it?" he asked. "In a place they'd never think to look, or so I thought." "Do you think they know you're looking again?" "Yes," he said. "They wouldn't be tightening the leash otherwise." That night, I made my decision. The invitation came 2 days later. A family dinner, mandatory attendance, formal attire, no spouses excused. "They want an audience," my husband said when I showed him the card. "They want control," I replied. He studied me closely. "What are you thinking?" I hesitated. Then, "I think they're underestimating me." His lips twitched, just slightly. "That's their mistake." The dinner was held in the main dining hall, a room designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. Long table, high-backed chairs, portraits of ancestors staring down like judges. I took my seat beside my husband, my posture calm, my hands steady. His mother sat at the head of the table, flanked by advisors and relatives who smiled too easily. Conversation flowed around us, thin and performative. Investments, politics, charity projects that existed more on paper than in practice. Halfway through the meal, her mother set down her fork. "We've been discussing the future," she said, her gaze sweeping the table before settling on me. Met her eyes. "Legacy is only worth protecting if it's worth remembering." A murmur rippled through the room. She smiled, spoken like someone new to power. Spoken like someone who's seen what power does when it's left unchecked. My husband's hand tightened on mine beneath the table. "This is not the time for idealism," she said coolly. "This is about stability." "Then perhaps we should talk about the instability caused by secrets." The room went silent. Her gaze sharpened. "What secrets?" I took a breath. "The ones that required my husband to disappear behind silence, the ones that nearly destroyed him." A few heads turned. Someone shifted uncomfortably. "This conversation is inappropriate." "To the contrary," I replied, "it's overdue." My husband's tablet lay untouched beside his plate. He hadn't typed a word. I stood. "I didn't marry into this family to be used, and I won't be managed. If you believe silence is your greatest weapon, then you've forgotten what happens when people finally speak." Her expression hardened. "Sit down." I didn't. "This ends now," I said. "You can stop interfering in my life and my work, or we can bring everything into the light." Her voice dropped. "You have no proof." I smiled then, not because I was confident, but because fear had finally found its direction. "You're right," I said. "I don't." The tension thickened. "But I know where you keep it, and I know you moved it recently, which means you're afraid." Her eyes flickered, just once. Dinner ended shortly after that. That night, the house felt different, quieter, charged. My husband waited until the staff had retired before speaking. "You were reckless," he said, though there was no anger in his voice. "I was honest," I replied. "They needed to know I'm not afraid." He shook his head. "They'll retaliate." "I know," I said. "That's why we need to act now." I told him everything about the staff, the storage room, the safe. "You're sure?" he asked. "As sure as I can be without seeing it, but there's more." I pulled out my phone and showed him a message from his mother's assistant. "Mrs. Caldwell would like to see you tomorrow morning, alone." He stared at the screen. "She's isolating you." "She thinks she is, but she's giving me access." He reached for my hands. "If this goes wrong—" "It won't," I said softly, "because I won't let them make you silent again." The next morning, I walked into his mother's study alone. The room smelled of old books and expensive polish. She stood by the window, her back to me. "You've caused quite a stir," I said, without turning. She turned then, her expression unreadable. "You are clever, but clever people often overestimate their position. I'm not overestimating, I'm counting." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit." I remained standing. "I won't take much of your time." Her eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" "The truth, and an end to this." She laughed softly. "You married a man who challenged an empire. Did you really think it would be that simple?" "No," I said, "but I think you did." The silence stretched. Finally, she spoke. "You should leave him." The words hit harder than I expected. "He's a liability, and now so are you. Walk away, and I'll ensure you're taken care of." I shook my head. "I don't need your protection." "You'll regret that," she said. "Perhaps, but I won't regret knowing I chose integrity." Her gaze hardened. "You have no idea what you're risking." I leaned forward, placing my hands on her desk. "I know exactly what I'm risking, and so do you." For the first time, I saw uncertainty in her eyes, because in that moment, she realized something crucial. Silence had been her weapon, and I had learned how to use it against her. I left his mother's study with my heart pounding, but my steps steady. The corridor outside felt longer than usual, every footfall echoing like it was announcing my defiance to the house itself. I didn't look back. I knew better than to give her that satisfaction. My husband was waiting for me in the small sitting room, standing instead of sitting, his shoulders tense. He searched my face the moment I entered, reading me the way he'd learned to read silence. "She tried to buy me," I said before he could ask. His jaw tightened. "I expected as much." "She also suggested I leave you." That did it. His composure cracked, just slightly. And I told her no," I said simply. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. When he opened them again, there was gratitude there, but also fear. "They won't stop now." "I know," I said. "That's why we can't wait anymore." We sat down together, knees almost touching, the quiet between us no longer heavy but focused, strategic. "What's your plan?" he asked. "I don't have a full one yet," I admitted, "but I know this. They're not as confident as they pretend. They're reacting, and people who react make mistakes." He nodded. "There's a reason the evidence hasn't surfaced yet. They're still deciding how to use it." "Or whether to destroy it," I said. "Exactly." We stayed up late that night, mapping possibilities, who could help us, who might betray us, which doors might open if we pushed in the right places. By dawn, we had a direction. The action we took wasn't dramatic, no midnight break-ins, no shouting matches, just a series of quiet moves, each one calculated to look harmless on its own. I reached out to an old colleague from my community work, a woman now employed at a regulatory nonprofit with a reputation for discretion. I didn't accuse, I didn't demand, I asked questions, framed them as concerns, hypotheticals. Meanwhile, my husband began redirecting his influence. Subtle changes in board votes, delayed approvals, requests for documentation that forced people to put things in writing they preferred to keep verbal. The family noticed, of course. Pressure mounted. An anonymous article appeared online questioning my husband's mental fitness to lead. Old psychological reports were referenced, distorted just enough to cast doubt without outright libel. The comments were vicious. Then came the call from my mother. "They came by the house," she said, her voice shaking. "Two men, polite, said they were checking in." My hands went cold. "What did they want?" "They asked about you," she said, "about your marriage, about whether you seemed stressed." I closed my eyes, anger flaring hot and sharp. "Are you okay?" "Yes," she said, "but I don't like this." "Neither do I." I'm so sorry." After I hung up, I found my husband in the study, staring at the wall like he was memorizing it. "They're escalating," he said quietly. "They crossed a line," I replied. "They involved my family." "That's on me," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "No," I said firmly, "that's on them." That was the moment my hesitation vanished. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Maria, the housekeeper, found me in the kitchen late one night. Her hands were trembling. "They're moving things," she whispered. "Boxes from the east wing tonight." My pulse quickened. "Where?" "I don't know," she said, "but I saw the safe open just for a moment." "Did you see what was inside?" She shook her head. "No, but I saw the folders, thick ones with red tabs." That was enough. I thanked her, pressed some cash into her hand despite her protests, and told her to take the next few days off. "Visit your sister," I said, "please." She understood. When I told my husband, his face went pale. If they're moving it now, they're preparing for something bigger. "Or cleaning up," I said. "We don't have time," he replied. "No," I agreed, "we don't." We didn't go to the authorities, not yet. Instead, we went to someone his family trusted implicitly, his Uncle Richard. Richard had always been the reasonable one, the mediator, the man who believed compromise was a virtue and loyalty a duty. He'd watched my husband grow up, been present at every important decision, always nodding, always quiet. We requested a private meeting. He arrived skeptical but curious, his silver hair immaculate, his suit tailored within an inch of its life. We met in a neutral space, a quiet restaurant far from the family's usual haunts. "What's this about?" he asked, folding his napkin. My husband looked at me, then back at his uncle. "I'm going to speak," he said. Richard stiffened. "You speak?" "Yes," my husband replied calmly, "and I always have." The silence that followed was thick with shock. "This isn't funny," Richard said. "It's not a joke. It's a choice I made to survive." I watched as years of assumptions crumbled in Richard's expression. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked finally. "Because you believe in stability and because what's coming will destroy it." My husband leaned forward. "They're planning to discredit me publicly, declare me unfit, take control." Richard's brow furrowed. "That's absurd." "Is it?" I asked gently. "Check the rumors, the articles, the visits to my mother." Richard hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I've heard whispers." "We know about the evidence," my husband said, "or what's left of it." That did it. Richard's face drained of color. "You shouldn't know that." "But we do," I said, "and we need to know where it is." Richard looked between us, torn, loyalty warring with conscience. "If this comes out," he said slowly, "everything collapses." "Yes," my husband replied, "including the parts that deserve to." Silence settled over the table. Finally, Richard spoke. "There's a backup." My heart leapt. "Where?" He said, "Off-site, a private storage facility under a shell company. Only 3 people know about it." "Your mother?" I asked. "Yes." "And the others?" He hesitated. "Me and you." My husband blinked. "Me?" Richard nodded. "She made you a beneficiary years ago in case something happened to her." The irony would have been funny if the stakes weren't so high. "Why tell us now?" I asked. Richard's voice dropped. "Because she's gone too far, and because I don't recognize what this family has become." We didn't sleep that night. By morning, we had a plan. Not to expose everything at once, that would be chaos, but to secure the evidence, to remove it from their control before they could destroy it. Richard made the call. By afternoon, we had access. The storage facility was nondescript, tucked between warehouses and offices. Nothing about it screamed secrets. That was the point. Inside, under harsh fluorescent lights, we opened the unit. Boxes lined the shelves, dozens of them, labeled in code, years of deception neatly archived. My husband picked up the first folder, his hands shaking. "This is it," he said. "This is what they tried to erase." I watched his face as he read, the weight of vindication and grief crashing over him at once. "They thought silence made me powerless," he said softly. "They were wrong." I placed my hand on his arm. "What do we do now?" He looked at me, his eyes clear. "Now," he said, "we make them listen." We didn't take the boxes home. That was the first rule my husband insisted on, and for once, I didn't argue. Bringing the evidence back into that mansion would have been like placing a lit candle in a room full of gas. Too many eyes, too many hands with keys. Instead, Richard arranged for the contents to be digitized, quietly, carefully, through a third-party firm that owed him favors and understood discretion the way surgeons understand blood loss. Copies would exist in more than one place. Redundancy, my husband called it. Insurance, I called it. The weight in his shoulders shifted the moment the files left our possession. For the first time since I'd met him, he slept. Not the light, guarded sleep of a man listening for danger, but a deep, exhausted kind that pulled him under within minutes. I lay awake beside him, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, thinking about how much damage had been done to a man who had learned to equate rest with risk. I didn't sleep much myself, because I knew what came next. The family felt the change before they understood it. Meetings were postponed, calls went unanswered, decisions that once sailed through approvals stalled inexplicably. For a dynasty built on control and predictability, uncertainty was its own kind of violence. His mother called first. Not me, him. I was in the kitchen when his phone rang. I watched him glance at the screen, the name lighting up like a challenge. He looked at me once, silently asking a question. I nodded. "Hello, Mother," he said. Hearing him speak into the phone, openly, without pretense, sent a chill through me. It felt intimate, dangerous. Her voice carried through the receiver, sharp and controlled. "You're being very foolish." "I've been foolish before, usually when I listen to you." A pause, then colder. "Where is it?" "Safe, for now." "You have no idea what you're doing," she snapped. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm ending this." Her laughter was short, humorless. "You think exposure will save you? It will destroy everything you touch." He closed his eyes briefly. Some things deserve to be destroyed. The call ended abruptly. I realized my hands were clenched around the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. "It started," I said. He nodded. "Yes." The first public consequence arrived 2 days later. A major donor withdrew from one of the family's flagship charities, citing ethical concerns. No details, no accusations, just enough to rattle the facade. Then a board member resigned, then another. The media didn't know where to look yet, but they could smell blood. Articles shifted in tone, questions crept in where praise once lived. Analysts used words like uncertainty and volatility with careful restraint. Inside the family, chaos bloomed. His sister showed up unannounced, eyes red, voice trembling. "What have you done?" she demanded, standing in our living room like a storm given shape. He didn't flinch. What needed to be done? "You've put all of us at risk," she gestured wildly. "Our children, our livelihoods." "Our integrity was already at risk," I said quietly. She turned on me then, her gaze sharp. "This is your fault." I held her stare. "No, this is the cost of silence." She laughed bitterly. "You think you're some kind of hero." "No, I think we're finally being honest." She left shortly after, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the walls. I sank into the couch, my legs trembling. They're turning on each other. That was always going to happen, my husband said. Fear makes people honest or cruel. Or both, I murmured. The real confrontation came a week later. His mother called a family meeting. Mandatory, immediate, no excuses. We knew it was coming. Still, the summons sent a ripple of dread through me. The house where it would take place, the original estate, had been designed to remind visitors of their insignificance. High ceilings, cold stone, portraits of ancestors who believed power was a birthright. We arrived together. He didn't bring his tablet. That alone caused a stir. Relatives whispered as we took our seats. Advisors shuffled papers they didn't need. His mother stood at the head of the room, her posture immaculate, her expression carved from ice. She began without preamble. This family is under threat from within. Her gaze locked onto her son. Your actions have destabilized decades of work. He stood. The room froze. I will speak because I am done being spoken for. A murmur swept through the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The authority in it came from restraint, from years of words withheld. You built this empire on silence, on fear, on the assumption that no one would ever challenge you because the cost was too high. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. You were wrong. Her eyes blazed. Sit down. He didn't. I have evidence, he said, of illegal financial practices, of deliberate harm hidden behind charitable fronts, of manipulation designed to destroy anyone who questioned you. The advisors stiffened. A cousin went pale. You wouldn't dare, she said. I already have, he replied calmly, confident of the calculation he'd made. Copies exist outside this room with people who understand exactly what they're looking at. I watched her carefully then. For the first time, I saw fear crack her composure. You're bluffing, she said. He shook his head. I'm finished bluffing. Silence swallowed the room. Finally, Richard spoke. Evelyn, he said quietly, it's over. Her head snapped toward him. You too? I should have spoken years ago, he replied. That's on me, but I won't be complicit anymore. One by one, others looked away, not in defiance, but in shame. My husband turned to them. This doesn't have to end in ruin, but it does have to end in truth. What do you want? His mother demanded. Resignation, he said, from all executive positions, independent audits, full transparency, and an end to the psychological warfare. Her laughter rang hollow. You think you can run this without me? I don't intend to. I intend to dismantle it. The word echoed like a gunshot. The meeting ended without resolution, but the power had shifted. Everyone felt it. The old rules no longer applied. As we left, his mother watched us go, her gaze burning into my back. This isn't finished, she said softly. No, I replied, turning to face her. It's just begun. The fallout was swift and brutal. Investigations were announced, accounts frozen, projects halted, names once untouchable now spoken with suspicion. Friends disappeared, invitations stopped, the world we'd married into began to collapse under the weight of its own lies, and with it came consequences. Threats arrived anonymously, not violent, never overt, but unsettling, warnings disguised as concern, offers framed as lifelines. My husband was asked, privately, to step aside for the good of the company, to issue a statement citing health reasons. He refused. The stress took its toll. There were nights he paced the house until dawn, his hands shaking, his voice hoarse from speaking after years of disuse. I learned the sound of his nightmares, the way he called out without words, his body fighting memories his mind had buried. I stayed awake with him, made tea, listened. One night he broke down. "I don't know who I am without the silence," he confessed, his voice cracking. "It was armor, and now it's gone." I held him, feeling the fragile weight of his grief. "You're learning," I said, "just like I am." He laughed weakly. "You didn't sign up for this." "I signed up for you," I replied. "The rest is just noise." The public reckoning arrived quietly. No dramatic press conference, no grand exposure, just facts, released methodically, verified, impossible to ignore. Articles shifted from speculation to confirmation. Words like systemic abuse and corporate malfeasance replaced euphemisms. Foundations dissolved, executives resigned. His mother retreated from public view. The mansion emptied. And one morning, as sunlight streamed through windows once shadowed by secrets, my husband stood in the kitchen and spoke without fear. "I don't regret it," he said. "Neither do I," I replied. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and smiled, a full, unguarded smile that transformed his face. "You gave me back my voice," he said. I shook my head. "You always had it." The consequences weren't all victorious. We lost wealth, comfort, certainty. Friends who loved us for what we represented drifted away. When the noise finally faded, that's when the real work began. Not the press statements or the legal disentangling or the careful rebuilding of reputations that could never be fully restored. I mean the quieter work, the kind no one applauds, the kind that happens in the early morning when you wake up unsure of who you are now that the crisis no longer defines you. For a long time, we existed in a strange in-between. The world no longer watched us closely, but it hadn't forgotten us either. His family's name still carried echoes, some resentful, some curious, some condemning. My own name had been reshaped by association. I was no longer just me, I was the wife, the woman who stood by him, the one who helped bring it all down. It took time to stop flinching at that. The smaller house helped. It sat on a quiet street with uneven sidewalks and neighbors who waved without knowing our history. No gates, no guards, just a front porch that creaked when you stepped on it and a kitchen window that caught the afternoon light just right. The first morning there, I burned the toast. I stared at the blackened slices, waiting for the familiar spike of anxiety, someone correcting me, someone watching, someone silently judging. But nothing happened. No staff appeared, no voice snapped instructions, just my husband, leaning against the counter, smiling softly. "Well," he said, "that's one way to christen a kitchen." I laughed, really laughed. It startled me how easy it felt. Healing, I learned, isn't a straight line. Some days felt almost normal. We grocery shopped, we argued about paint colors, we forgot for hours at a time what it had cost us to get there. Other days were heavier. There were nights he woke up gasping, his voice caught somewhere between dream and memory. Nights when he sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his throat like it still belonged to a man who wasn't allowed to speak. On those nights, I didn't ask questions. I just sat with him. Sometimes I placed his hand over my heart so he could feel something steady beneath his palm. Sometimes that was enough, and sometimes it wasn't. One evening, months after we'd moved, he came home unusually quiet. Not his old silence, the strategic, armored one, but something brittle. He reached out again, he said, setting his keys down with too much care. My chest tightened. "Who?" "His mother," he replied. I waited. "She wants to meet, says she's ready to talk." The word talk hung between us, weighted with history. "What do you want to do?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He walked to the window, staring out at the dimming street where a child rode a bike in slow circles, carefree and loud. I don't know, he said honestly. Part of me wants closure, part of me wants distance, and part of me, his voice faltered, part of me is still that boy who learned silence because it was safer than disappointment. I reached for him, resting my forehead against his back. You don't owe her anything, I said. Not forgiveness, not understanding, not even your voice. He turned then, his eyes wet but clear. I know. Whatever you choose, I added, I'm with you. That was still true. He agreed to meet her, alone. I didn't try to stop him. Love, I was learning, didn't mean shielding someone from every painful choice. Sometimes it meant trusting them to face it. When he came home that night, it was late. He didn't speak right away. He took off his coat, set it down, and stood in the middle of the living room like he was relearning the shape of himself. She looks smaller, he said finally. Not weaker, just smaller. I sat with him, listening. She didn't apologize, not really. She reframed everything as necessity, as leadership, as sacrifice. I nodded. I'd expected nothing less. But she admitted something. She said she was afraid of what would happen if I spoke, afraid people would listen. A sad smile touched his lips. She was right. How do you feel? I asked. Tired, he said, but lighter. That night he slept without waking. As the months passed, something else began to surface, grief. Not just for what he'd lost, but for what he'd never had, a childhood without performance, a family without conditions, a voice without consequence. And I had my own grief to reckon with. For the version of myself who thought safety was the absence of conflict, for the woman who believed choosing quiet meant choosing peace, for the girl who didn't yet understand that silence, when forced, could hollow a person out. We talked more than we ever had before, about values, about fear, about the small compromises people make every day without realizing how much they add up. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes, I found our wedding album. I almost put it back, but instead, we sat on the floor together, turning the pages slowly. The photos felt like artifacts from another life. In every image, he was silent. In every image, I was smiling without knowing why. I look so young, I said softly. You were, he replied. So was I. There was no bitterness in his voice, just acceptance. The true test of healing came quietly. No crisis, no confrontation, just a choice. I was offered a leadership role at a national nonprofit, one with visibility, influence, and funding, the kind of opportunity I would have leapt at without hesitation once. But it came with strings, subtle ones, political ones, expectations about optics and restraint. I brought the offer home, spread the paperwork across the kitchen table. What do you think? I asked. He read carefully, his brow furrowed. He thinks it's impressive, he said, and I think it might ask you to be someone you've worked hard not to be. That was all. The decision was mine. I turned the offer down. Not because it wasn't tempting, not because it wasn't important, but because I recognized the feeling it stirred in me, the familiar tightening, the quiet warning. I chose differently this time, and that, more than anything, told me how far I'd come. Our marriage didn't become a fairy tale. We argued, sometimes fiercely. We had disagreements about money, about boundaries, about how much of the past to revisit and how much to let rest. But we never again confused silence with safety. When something hurt, we said it. When fear crept in, we named it. When one of us pulled away, the other noticed. That was the work. One evening, years later, we sat on the porch as dusk settled in. The air smelled like rain and cut grass. Somewhere down the block, someone played music too loud. He leaned back in his chair, content. Do you ever think about how it started? He asked. All the time, I admitted. And? I think, I said slowly, that I married a man the world thought was mute, but what I really married was a man whose voice had been taken. He smiled at that. And you gave it back? No, I corrected gently. You reclaimed it. I just refused to let anyone convince you it was yours. He reached for my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. That made all the difference. If there's a lesson in my story, and I believe there is, it's this. Silence is never neutral. Sometimes it protects, sometimes it wounds, sometimes it disguises control as peace, and sometimes breaking it costs everything you thought you wanted but gives you what you actually need. I married a mute millionaire believing silence meant safety. I learned that the most dangerous thing a powerful person can do is speak the truth. And I learned that love isn't about shielding someone from the world, it's about standing beside them when the world pushes back. So I'll ask you, gently, the way Auntie May always does, if you discovered the silence in your life wasn't peace, but fear, would you find the courage to break it? If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe voices matter, especially the ones that were once silenced, stay with us. There are more stories to tell.